So, I mean, I want to pull on a few threads there. So, one is you kept saying figure it out. And to me, that's exactly what it is. I've hired quite a few people over the years, and I don't know exactly how to measure for it, but I always look for figure it out ability, like the ability for a person to figure it out. I don't necessarily need them to have the specific skills
Mm,
or experience, but if I believe that they have the capability to figure something out, that's going to definitely push them up way higher on an interview process. And I think the other aspect that I think is very critical that you touched on is when you're looking at a job or a role, you don't look at the experience that it requires, you look more at the experience that you'll gain from it. It's not about,
mhm.
"Can I
Yep.
do this?" It's more about, "Yeah, I know I can figure it out, but what will I gain in the doing of it?" And I think that
Yeah.
mindset is one of the parts that makes you a fantastic entrepreneur, operator, growth-minded individual, a person who bets on yourself. So, I'm sure we could go deep on all of those aspects, but you brought up Cambodia, you brought up kind of Thailand. How
Yeah.
do you think that that shaped who you are today?
I think it's made me. I would start with being grateful of everything that I have, and appreciative. So like I wake up every day and I was like, yeah, I get to do some pretty cool things, and then you contrast that with kind of like the beginnings that I had, and so one, I would say it's made me humble and grateful for just like being in a position that I am, because I know a lot of the shoe could easily be on the other foot where my parents didn't escape. Maybe some horrific things happen. Just as an aside, like for example, like just to give some more contextual background. So during this 4.5 year period, at the height of this genocide, they had women in one camp, men in one camp. My mom escaped the country first, ended up in Thailand, um, in the refugee camp, escaped Cambodia. My dad was at a different camp. So the day he escaped, he was actually scheduled to be executed. So you
Wow.
think about, like, when I think about that story, and the reason he escaped was the Vietnamese invaded or rescued whoever you ask. It could be a different answer. All hell broke loose, and that's how he escaped. And then, amongst hundreds of thousands of refugees, he was able to find my mom, like
Wow.
in camp. Otherwise, I wouldn't exist. So when I think
Wow.
about that story, fuck, I'm like, dude, I won the fucking lottery. You know, you know.
That's incredible.
Um,
Yeah.
and then we stayed there for I think a year, and then we got transferred to the Philippines, where there was a refugee processing center. So I lived in the Philippines for a bit. I don't remember, yeah, almost none of it, actually. And then we got sponsored to come to America, um, and we were like, I used to be ashamed to tell this story, but now it's like, no, like this is a part of my story. Like, yeah, I grew up on welfare and government assistance, and we used to get the food stamp checks and go buy the cheap shit at the grocery store because that's what the government allowed you to buy with food stamps. So there was like the kicks, the most unhealthy cheese, and the yeah. But just in terms of the impact it's had on me, so besides being grateful, it's also made me a lot more resourceful, right? And I think learning how to turn things on its head has been extremely helpful for me. So I wrote this article recently for a publication in London, and it was like the story we sell ourselves, right? And I listed three things. One of them was, yeah, like my parents didn't speak English, and growing up in certain parts of America, you get made fun of that. But I'm like, no, like I'm bilingual. I can speak another language, right? We didn't grow up with money. What was the opposite of that? It made me extremely resourceful, right? And then, yeah, we're refugees from another country, and then I think about the whole story. It's like, no, like you should be grateful. Like your parents went through all that to get us here, to give us an opportunity at a better life. And it's interesting. Like I was driving yesterday to dinner. I had this podcast on from 20 VC. You probably Harry Stebbings, and his guest was a guy named Nick Hoover. And he's on Twitter and everything. But like one of the things he was talking about that really resonated with me, he was just like, right now, like we're all like so many people are focusing on like get rich quick, right? Whether it's crypto or something else related to technology, AI. But what he was saying was interesting. He's like, no, he's like the whole construct and mindset of his family was like, no, like his great grandfather came over, I don't remember exactly where, but like he put us on first base. His grandparents put them on second base, just to use a baseball analogy. Then his parents put them on third base. His goal is to be able to put his kids a foot away from home plate. So it's not this get rich quick, schemes that so many people are going after. It's like, how do you build that over generations and prepare your kids to achieve more so that their kids can achieve more?
Yeah, one of the concepts I've come across recently is identical to that. I mean, that's part of the reason this podcast is called The Long Game, is those who think in decades will beat those who think in years. Those who think in generations will beat those who think in decades. And it's the longer your time horizon for defining success, the longer you can wait without seeing the financial success or the thing that you want. You don't see the millions in your bank account, so you give up. But if you're thinking about it from decades or your lifetime, and you don't worry about having the wealth or the riches or whatever it is that you want, and you just keep doing the consistent action that will eventually get you there, and you're not worried about the time it's going to take to get you there, you will absolutely outlast everyone else in the game. And just by outlasting, you will win because everyone else will have given up. And if you've been working at this thing, you've been beating at this craft for 30 years, and there are new people trying, they've been doing it for a few years or 5 years or 10 years, you're going to win because you have so much more compound experience and growth and networks, and you've learned all these lessons. So I absolutely agree with that mentality, and the mindset. I mean, I think everything that you kind of shared is in the article that you wrote. It's about, there is reality. There are things that happened. You were a refugee. You were poor, right? These are truths. These are facts. But it's the story that we sell ourselves. It's the story that we build around, well, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's neither, except what you want it to be. And so leveraging that to, you can very much make yourself miserable. Every single person has a very valid reason for why they could be miserable. But do you want to choose that? Or every single person has a very valid reason for being absolutely ecstatic and grateful that you're fucking here. Like, you are actually here. Yep. You're not one of the, billions of people that have all died in the history of the earth, and one of the infinite number of people that have never existed. You are here. So that alone sets you way ahead of everyone else. But yeah, it's so much about it is mindset from my perspective. And I think that's one of the reasons you and I have always connected is you have and radiate that gratitude for just being here. You take every single moment as a gift. You focus on what can you do, how can you show up in the world, how can you learn, and I mean, I'm lucky to consider you a friend.